why don't we get started?
I think we should grab some room sound first.
Oh,
so
sure.
I'm going to clap and then silence for 30 seconds.
30 seconds?
Yeah.
I'm offended.
No, because I was just listening to the Rebel Without a Cause one, and that was when I first started doing the clapping.
Yeah.
And I said 5 that time.
Yeah.
And so I clapped. There was 5 seconds of the banjo reacting. And then you said, Did you hear the banjo? Just when it got quiet.
That's hilarious.
And then I clapped again. And then the banjo reacted again.
Yeah.
Because, we wanted to hear the banjo again. So I clapped again. And the banjo reacted again. And the second it stopped, we were both, admittedly, it was both of us. We were like, oh, wow, that was so weird how the banjo made a noise when I clapped.
Oh, but what's really weird is our low attention spans. That's what we're getting at. Welcome to All Doubt. My name's Joel.
And I'm Vincent.
And today we have our wrap-up episode for the capital C classics that we've been watching, reading, listening, and otherwise experiencing. So the wrap-up episode, we're going to tie all the loose ends together from the last, is it 5 episodes?
Yeah, there's 5 things that we talked about in this chunk.
I think we can also actually include Murder on the Orient Express, maybe a couple references to that, because that falls under capital C classics, right?
I suppose, although it wasn't officially part of the lump.
Yeah,
it wasn't officially part of the chunk.
Sure, yeah. Vincent, this is my bright voice. What's new with you?
Oh, I recently watched Ready Player One.
Mm-hmm.
The movie came out.
Okay.
Relatively recently.
You've been hyped about that.
And I say this, in our continual decision to not exactly timestamp our episodes, but give you enough clues to you can basically figure out.
Well, a big clue, it's springtime and I'm stuffed up. It's spring.
It came out. I enjoyed it. It took some divergences from the book, which it's necessary because a lot of I forget how much I've described about the story to you before.
I feel like a good amount.
But like in the book, he has to overcome 3, let's say, challenges. But in the movie, they changed all the challenges to something else.
All of them?
Yeah.
Oh.
Broadly speaking. There's also technically 6 in the book, but they reduced it to 3 and changed what they were. And some people were upset about that because they were like, "Oh, I want it to be like a shot-for-shot remake of the book," But I sort of understand that in making the movie, people don't want to watch 20 minutes of the main character like playing Pac-Man.
Yeah.
For an hour to get the high score. And that the changes they did make, in my opinion, were better fit it as a visual medium of a movie rather than a novel. So I really enjoyed that.
Oh. And you don't want to spoil or do you want to say more about it, or how are you?
There's not really much to spoil. It's a junk food movie. It's not a big fancy makes you think artsy thing. It's not a Schindler's List. It's not a it's not a Pearl Harbor. It's not a
what?
It's not a.
Wasn't that one of those hands down crappy movies?
Pearl Harbor? But it's about a serious thing.
Oh, okay. Sure.
It's not a serious movie. It's not a heavy movie. It's a fun movie where you can see Tracer from Overwatch and Freddy Krueger and Hello Kitty and the other Sanrio characters walking down a sidewalk together.
Oh, what?
Because it's of all the cameos. It's a fun. It's a fun movie. The climactic fight was exactly what I wanted. They could have used more airships in that scene, but it was a lot of. So maybe not exactly what I wanted, but it was a lot of. It delivered what I wanted.
I feel like
just a hodgepodge of cameos, like Super Smash Brothers, where it's a bunch of different things, or in Wreck-It Ralph, where it's a bunch of video game characters, or in the Lego Movie, where it's a bunch of different Lego dudes.
See, I find it like this sounds just like the Adam Sandler movie that had all these 80s references.
Oh,
Pixel, yeah.
The movie that was so bad, it
bad.
got the thing that it was inspired by taken down because it was named the same thing.
What thing?
It was inspired by a short film.
Oh.
Also called Pixel.
Yeah.
That was broadly the same concept of 80s video game, Pac-Man's showing up.
Yeah.
And Space Invaders and Galagas and whatever. Asteroids besieging a city. So basically the movie, but shorter and without Adam Sandler and his crew.
Oh.
But it was also called Pixels. But when the movie came out, it got taken down because of the auto copyright detection thing.
What? No way.
Thought that it decided that it was infringing upon the thing that was inspired by it,
which did terribly.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
But no, this did really well, and I was surprised at how when I was sitting in the theater to watch Ready Player One, I was surprised at how diverse the audience was. I was expecting it to be mostly because it's based on a book. It's on a weird 80s referential nerd book.
Oh.
So I was expecting the audience to be to skew more nerdy. Although that's sort of a term that doesn't mean as much now because the biggest franchise is a comic book series.
You're talking about Star Wars?
Yes.
Wait, comic book?
No, Star Trek.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm talking about the Marvel movies.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know what the biggest franchise just of anything.
The biggest current franchise based on comic books is the Marvels things.
Okay, I must have just missed a piece of that.
It's a 10-year franchise with 17 movies.
Yeah.
The upcoming Infinity War movie sold have had its shows sold out a month before it released.
Really?
Thank you. Because it's been so hyped up.
Huh. That's buck wild.
But so I was expecting the audience of Ready Player One to skew more nerdy. But there was a bunch of people on dates, normal looking people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
People on dates. The people, there was a group of girls sitting to my left who I would guess, or I would describe as the popular girls in a high school kind of thing, and they looked like they were really enjoying the movie. Which I was cool. Yeah. I was not expecting that based on the demographics I was expecting based on what I know about the story.
Yeah.
But no, I really enjoyed it. One, I guess in terms of the storytelling of the movie, it being condensed down to the time frame it got condensed down into sort of caused some issues because in the book takes place over a year. Or a year and a half. So there's time for the romance to breathe, for them to get together and for them to have a fight and for them to get back together, for them to have a sensible trajectory in terms of timeline.
Yeah.
But in the movie it takes place over a long weekend basically.
That's a change.
So it's much more fast paced. Which aside setting the romance angle aside, I can understand because there's huge chunks of the book where he's just sitting and doesn't know what to do next. Can't figure out the clue to do the next puzzle or whatever. So he's just I don't know, I bought a new spaceship. It's the Firefly spaceship. I bought a new car. It's the car from Ghostbusters. Right. Isn't that neat? And stuff like that.
Yeah,
I bought a new suit so I can instead of using my hands, I'm wearing a haptic suit so I can feel the world that I'm in now.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. In a book, like we've mentioned before, you can fill as much time as you want with in a book, right? You can make any amount of time last for as long as you want, and that's a bit harder in movies.
Yeah. So I sort of understand from that angle of why the movie takes place over 3 or 4 days, maybe.
Yeah.
It also adds a bit more urgency.
Oh yeah.
Because in the book they're oh no, we gotta solve this next clue before the bad guys do, and it's already been 6 months. They could be almost solving it now. Whereas in the movie it's more of a chase, a literal chase almost.
Oh yeah.
But the romance feels more artificial. because of how quickly things progress.
Yeah, makes sense.
But I'm also liking, like, listeners at home, Joel is wearing a 3-piece suit and a top hat right now.
You weren't supposed to tell them. This was for you.
He's not wearing a top hat. I'm sorry, that was... But he should be.
What was that about? What are you talking about?
Like, I like that you dressed up for the classic, the finale for the classic chunk.
Oh, like the actual clothes I'm wearing?
Yeah.
I'm not in a 3-piece suit. This is... Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, and I'm also wearing shoes. Definitely. Yeah. What's new with me, you mean?
Yes, Joel. So Joel, what's new with you?
Well, lately, as far as entertainment goes, I've been playing this game from 1993 called Betrayal at Krondor.
Okay.
Have I mentioned this?
I've heard of it. I haven't. I don't think you've mentioned it to me, but I've heard of it. I think I played it for like 5 minutes, like a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah, yeah. I find I bring this up a good amount in my life. It was a game that I played when I was probably 5, and I was born in 1990s, and this came out in 93. And my dad was really into computers and some computer games, and he was really into this one, so I wanted to be into it too. So he let me play it, and I just loved it. But I remember I always got stuck at this one part, or near this one part, where you go into a dungeon thing.
And for listeners at home, and also me, because I don't know what kind of game this is. What kind of game?
Oh, it's an RPG, and it's a first person one, but it has Doom style graphics.
Okay.
Like very pixelated, because this is cutting edge 1993. So it's also like one frame at a time will update. So like wherever you are in the world is like a still image until you press forward to move forward, and then things move.
Because
you know what I mean?
like I was gonna say, I think most things operate on one frame at a time. I think that's how movies work.
I mean, you're controlling the frames.
Right. It like moves with you.
Yeah.
Like time passes with you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like if you're approaching a bunch of bad guys and you move up to them, they're all completely still until you press move again, and then they all move a little bit.
So it's like turn-based, arguably.
Yeah, the fight's turn-based as
I think
well.
it's called.
Yeah, check it out. It's cool. It's a little bit hard to look at if you're not used to 1993 graphics, which I totally am. But so I always got stuck at this. I mean, part.
I like how. Sorry to interrupt, but I like how you said it's cool, then immediately marched it back with like the graphics being terrible from and being from 93.
So cool. So I always got stuck at this one part, and I think that's what's driven me as an adult to continuously come back to this game. Because I tried to play it when I was like 16. I got an old DOS computer, and the first thing I thought to do is put on Betrayal at Krondor, and I like found the floppy disk and stuff and put it on, and it hardly ran because it was just the wrong computer and blah blah blah. And then later in my life, I downloaded DOSBox, which is, do you know DOSBox? Yeah. It's a program that allows you to run old games like this, old DOS games. And that's sort of worked, sort of didn't work. I had troubles with it, had troubles with saving and stuff. And then another time after that, I came back to it again, and I beat the first level. And that's when I realized that right before the ending of the first chapter, they're separated into chapters. That's where I always got stuck when I was a kid. And so after I beat the first level, I immediately lost all interest in playing it, because I finally moved that roadblock in my mind. If I can't beat this game, that's what it was.
I have a similar thing with like open world games.
Oh yeah.
You know, like Grand Theft Auto. Whenever I get to the like final mission,
yeah,
and it's very clear that it's the final mission,
yeah,
I just don't do the mission.
Really?
Because I've found that when I do the mission, it like in my head ties off the game.
Oh yeah.
So like the game is done.
Yeah.
So there's nothing else to do, even if there's still a bunch of stuff to do.
Mm-hmm.
So like I just do anything else other than that last mission.
Really?
So that it's not technically complete.
Oh yeah.
Because once I do the mission, that's the end of the story, and I don't want to play it anymore.
Yeah.
Like even if I do want to, like I can't bring myself to it's not as fun or whatever to play it anymore.
Yeah, I felt that desire with games like Final Fantasy, like older games that really, when you finish the boss and you see the last cutscene, you're really done. Those ones I didn't like finishing for the same reason.
I never really got into the Final Fantasy games.
Oh.
I played the one that was on GameCube. I think there's several on GameCube actually, but the Crystal Chronicles, that was the one I played.
Oh yeah.
Got really into that. But it was like, I didn't own it. I would have to borrow it from like Roger's Video.
Oh yeah.
Those were the days.
Yeah, hell yeah. Well, about Krondor. So that was the second to last time before this time when I downloaded it and like played it a good amount, and I beat the first level, and then I was honest with myself and I was like, I just don't want to play this anymore. But that created a new dichotomy in my mind, a new problem in my mind to fix, which is that I haven't beaten this game and I lost all interest in it, so I need to fix that. So now I went back to it this time, still just thriving in nostalgia from being 3 or 5 or something. And I am on chapter 5 now, and the game also as an adult, not as hard as when you're a 5-year-old.
Yeah, I was going to say,
kind of flying through it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, is the difficulty, like, is it like one of those legitimately hard old games, or was it just difficult because you were a child?
Definitely both. Like the part where I got lost, it was a maze that if you just keep running out the options, you'll get to the end. And another part of the problem is that I didn't know, like it's an RPG, so you have to buy food and you have to like maintain your health and like train and stuff to get stronger. I didn't understand any of that. I just wanted to look for these magic chests in the game and like solve riddles. So I'd go into battles like half alive and not know why I kept dying. So yeah, as an adult, it just makes a lot more sense playing this game.
Because that's another thing, right? Like from like the old games, they just did not hold your hand at all.
Oh, yeah.
Like notoriously, XCOM was a like horrifyingly difficult game.
Yeah.
Because like, are you familiar with the original XCOM?
No.
It's you are the, well, you aren't anyone in particular. You know, like how in The Sims you aren't specifically a single person.
Yeah.
You're the like consciousness that is controlling these people. But you are in charge of this non-governmental or like international organization that is tasked with defending the Earth from these aliens that have just suddenly shown up and are starting to invade. And at the beginning, you just have contemporary shit. You know, you have like it was like, I forget when it came out, but it was sort of gesturing a bit to the future. So you have like a Power Ranger suit, you know, a Power Ranger looking kind of like bodysuit that did nothing basically, and like a pistol and maybe a rifle, fighting these gray aliens that have like death rays and like laser beams and stuff like that. And the aliens start, you know, relatively weak and then get stronger as the timeline of the game goes on. But you have to keep pace with like research and funding and building and hiring scientists and stuff like that. And it is a very unforgiving game. And it's one of those games where like if you won't know this the first time you're playing it, but if you do not do certain things early on in the game, you are set up for failure. There's no way for you to win.
Man, that sounds horrible.
Yeah, but that's because like back in those days, from what I imagine, especially if you were a kid, these games were expensive. Well, they're also expensive now, but like there weren't very many of them. Which is the bigger thing, I guess. So if you got a game, it had to be worth your time because you wouldn't be getting another one for a while, or another good one wouldn't really be showing up for a while, especially if it was like a home game. You know, arcade machines are arcade machines, but so if it was a game you bought for home, you would, especially like I said, especially if you were a kid, it would have to be something that you could just sink your time into. To get your money's worth.
Right.
You know, like if you paid however much money it was and then finished it in an afternoon, you wouldn't really.
You'd be disappointed.
You'd be disappointed. You wouldn't.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be worth your money.
I have a Metal Gear Solid game like that.
like if you bought like a movie ticket and it was like a 10-minute movie, you'd be upset.
Yeah, sounds like the Metal Gear Solid game I have.
What? Don't tell me more about this Metal Gear Solid game.
You want to hear about it?
Yes.
I can't remember which one it's called, but it was released quickly, apparently due to timeline constraints, and it's
like in-universe timeline constraints, or like
no
real world production
world. Yeah.
Okay.
Like the company was told to release a game now, so they released what appears to be the first chapter of a big game with a whole bunch of side quests that are all on the same map. If anyone's played the game, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And then a few months later, the full game came out, which was like, a normal game that takes like a long time to finish, a normal amount of time. But this game, you can finish it in the fastest speed run I saw was probably 3 minutes. You're finished the game. For me, it took me like, 3 hours because I'm not really a gamer person.
Well, I don't think speedruns are an accurate representation.
Well, exactly.
But was this like a recent thing?
Oh yeah, like a couple of years ago.
Was it the like demo of Metal Gear Solid 5?
Well, it was released as a full game.
Sure. But was it the like the mini version of Metal Gear? Was it the mini version of Metal Gear Solid 5?
Probably. Let me look it up.
Was it like Peace Walker? Was that what it's called?
I feel like it was.
Because I played the actual game and it was delightful.
Oh yeah. Oh, Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes.
Oh right, yeah, Ground Zero.
Yeah, exactly.
Peace Walker's something else.
Yeah, Peace Walker's before this.
Right.
I think this is happening in a similar time frame.
I think it was supposed to be like. I think the one you're talking about is like a prologue, right?
Well, yeah, but when it was released, I'm just reiterating myself now, but it was released as a full game, and it angered people, including me, because I thought I was buying a full game, and I spent
Have you played the actual full game though?
$10 on it. No, I haven't.
Wait, $10, and you thought it was a full game?
Yeah. Well, it was from a pawn shop in California, or somewhere.
I'm sorry. Have you played the full game?
No.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
It is.
This game's also great. It's just like the first chapter of. Yeah. Go on.
But yeah, no, in Metal Gear Solid 5, it's the only Metal Gear Solid game I've actually played.
Oh yeah.
Also another franchise I never really got into.
It's a cool franchise. It's really violent.
It's very weird. Also, that's one of the data points I have about it.
Yeah.
There's a like 90 minutes cutscene in one of them, I think, from what I understand.
Yeah.
But no, it's great because it's from what I heard, and I don't know if this is true, but it sounds cool, so I'm gonna repeat it as if it was true.
Hell yeah.
That the guy who made it, I forget his name, I don't really know names, saw Skyrim or played Skyrim, and he was like, I want to make this game. Oh. And just put the like freedom of Skyrim into his game, because that's not what his games used to be prior to this. They were like very like mission based things, like discrete missions, explicit, like separate missions. But in this one, it's like an open world.
You're talking about Metal Gear Solid 5 in particular?
Yeah.
Oh.
In this one, it's an open world. You wander around a big chunk of Afghanistan and then a big chunk of the Congo, I'm going to say. So a more green tropical area. But it's huge, and you got to move around, and you can like free roam basically. And another thing that did really well about this game was that it had several levels of failure. Like say how the mission was to catch this general, or like the mission was to eavesdrop on this conversation that this general is having to find the location for this weapon or whatever, or this hostage you need to save. So you could do that, which would involve you following the general to this location where you'd meet someone else and you'd talk about whatever he's talking about, and you'd learn the location, then go there. Or you could, intercept him before he gets there and like kidnap him. And then the voiceover, or like the voice in your ear, the mission command is like, okay, I guess we can just ask him here.
Yeah.
And then a little bit later, okay, we got the place out of him. Here's the location. And then you go there. Or whereas in some other games that are more strict about what you do, like Assassin's Creed, the more traditional Assassin's Creed games, where like if you take like this is the mission, if you deviate it, like this is the mission, and if you deviate from it by half an inch, we will reset the game and reload the mission, and you have to do exactly what we say, which is ironic given that its like tagline is nothing is true, everything is permitted. But if you take a step out of line, back to the start.
That does not apply meta at all.
So like you and with Metal Gear Solid, with this way of different levels of failure, or different, you could tackle the different missions in different ways. So it was neat in how you could go at it from different angles.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should probably turn to our topic for this.
Yes, and our topic is the review of our capital C classics, specifically reviewing collectively Rebel Without a Cause, Citizen Kane, The Sound of Music, the Orson Welles War of the Worlds broadcast, and The Old Man and the Sea.
So to frame a discussion about all these stories, I was thinking we could ask each other questions about them, and not just about the stories themselves, but about reading and experiencing a bunch of these classic stories and what that means, right? Like, what's the importance of doing that? So with that, my first question for you, Vincent, is why is experiencing these stories, these classics, important, or what do we learn from this?
Well, I think it would depend on the classic, right? Or like why it's classic. Like if for something like Citizen Kane, it was so good, quote unquote, that the things it did, the innovations that it came up with in its creation, in its filming, in its assembly, or whatever, have become industry standards.
Right.
But as a result, it's not that interesting anymore. It's not it's not as like the first movie that was in color.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine, did really well and made color a good thing to have in movies, right?
Yeah.
But now that all the movies are in color, it being the first one, it being in color doesn't really make it special.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But compared to something like Old Man and the Sea, I don't know if that created any kind of new techniques in terms of storytelling, but it, I guess, was like enraptured enough people and that they liked it, for it to persevere.
To win a Nobel Prize.
Sure. For it to be like recognized.
Yeah.
And compared to like Sound of Music, again, I don't know about any innovations they did in that one.
Mm-hmm.
But it again like made people happy enough, and did well for it to continue to be held up as a good film. I don't know if I would say the same thing about Citizen Kane. Like I've said in the past, I would describe Citizen Kane as a great movie, but not necessarily a good movie.
So then, is there any merit in reading or experiencing or listening to these stories nowadays?
I disagree with the question in that, is there any merit? Of course there's some merit.
So you're
even in the
answering
worst
yes
things
to the question.
But I mean, I feel the question's too broad for there to be a meaningful response without digging deeper, which I'm going to try to do.
Deeper, sure.
Yeah. No, I've been doing this for a while.
Respond to the question.
There is the argument for like something being culturally significant.
Yeah.
Like Rebel Without a Cause. Again, like still, I didn't quite care for the movie, but I could see it being culturally significant because it speaks or draws attention to or is about this issue about bored teens driving cars off cliffs for no reason other than that they're bored.
Yeah.
Or the like, I don't know, universality of particular stories that shape public consciousness or pop culture, or like in Citizen Kane, about how one of the readings that I liked about it was that how with the whole Rosebud thing, how this guy, his entire life has been under the microscope of the press, of the media, but he was still able to keep one private secret
Yeah.
or two, you know. How that's a neat take on that,
Oh yeah.
on like privacy and of like fame, you know, among the other readings you could take on that particular story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you're touching on something that I thought about with reading and, you know, with taking in these stories. I also am not immediately drawn to them, and I think it's for similar reasons. It's that when you see the first movie that set a standard, or the first book that set a standard, you've seen that standard 100 times now, because it's 50 years old. But I found it fascinating to get an insight on how people were thinking at the time when these movies, or I keep saying movies, but when any of these were made. Like one thing that stands out to me is in Rebel Without a Cause, when the characters keep suggesting that the father hit his wife, and it's just like yeah, he could do that, like a standard thing, and that's like really upsetting in modern times.
Well, I think it was just mostly one character and one family, right? I don't think like Plato's character, that didn't really come up as a discussion topic because his dad was dead and was a war hero,
right?
And how Judy's father was sort of the opposite, how he was like, he needed to be more affectionate. And that it was Jim, is that his name? James Dean's character?
Yeah.
How that was a thing that he was feeling. And I think we mentioned this in that episode, how I'm not sure, at least, if we're supposed to fully agree with that.
Yeah.
Or to that extent.
Yeah.
You know, how like, if the dad hitting his wife, if we're supposed to be rooting for that, or if even then we were supposed to be like, that's a bit much. I see what you're saying, but that's a bit much. You know, because we are shown that the father, Jim's father, is very ineffectual in terms of like presence or decision making or whatever, you know, and like the big argument. I'm remembering this because I just listened to that episode.
Oh yeah.
The big scene where it's Jim, his father, and his mother all arguing about whether or not Jim should go to the cops about the school bully just dying in a horrifying fireball at the bottom of a cliff.
And like Jim being mostly responsible for that.
Well, I think they would say their boredom was responsible for that.
Sure, okay.
But how the mom was just shouting at Jim, and Jim was just turning to his father, who had his face in his hands, and Jim was asking his father to like stand up for him. I was like, no, Dad, we need to go to the cops. And the dad was like, no, I can't stand up for this. Or like, not even that, but like, I can't, don't look to me for support for this. You know,
I can't deal with this.
Yeah, I can't deal with this. This is too much for me.
Yeah.
Whereas the mom was being very overbearing, was I think a word we'd say. Also, the grandma was also very like, in your face.
Oh.
In the brief scenes that she was in. So yeah, like, I don't know if we, the audience, were supposed to agree that, oh, maybe Dad should hit Mom more was a legitimate scale reaction, or if we, the audience, were supposed to say like, oh, that's a bit much, but I see where that's coming from.
Yeah. That's interesting. I guess it's interesting to see it even presented at that time, to see that anyone could have that idea. I feel like it would be different if we had that same presentation in a modern movie. If a movie that came out today had a character saying, why can't Dad just hit Mom more? I mean, he doesn't say that explicitly, but it's getting close to that. That would be not accepted at all. And I feel like characters would have to respond to it within the movie. Although
Sure.
I do agree with what you're saying, that I don't think that you can really take Jim's word for, like, he's an untrustworthy narrator.
Yeah, like we aren't, like, there's no other voice saying, yes, that is true. That is what this movie is arguing for.
Yeah.
And because of the like time gap between the movie being made and us watching it in, 2017, 2018, we don't have the context or the
cultural knowledge.
The cultural knowledge, yeah, for for how that was supposed to be received.
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, that also relates to another reason why I liked watching these, or that I thought it was thought-provoking, experiencing all these stories, is the differences, but also the similarities. So all the ways that these different periods of time, or these older periods of time, are really similar to ours.
Although that was something I was thinking about. That's more obvious in, or like the differences and similarities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the signifiers that it's from a particular era.
Yeah.
You know, seemed more obvious, or more obvious, more clear in, you know, the movies and in the War of the Worlds thing than in The Old Man and the Sea. And that came out in what?
Oh yeah.
50-something?
Yeah, it was the 50s.
Yeah. But it wasn't. Maybe that's just a result of it being at sea for like 90% of the book. But that's the thing as well. Like the other ones were either explicitly or have become to be snapshots of a time,
mm-hmm.
right? But and that's part of how they're classics.
Mm-hmm.
But The Old Man and the Sea, I don't think so as much. There is the talk of whatever that baseball player's name was, DiMaggio.
DiMaggio, yeah.
But other than that, it doesn't really timestamp it anywhere other than them not having iPhones.
Well, I you're right. They didn't have iPhones.
I'm glad you agree with me on that.
I remembered from reading it the first time, like when I went back to it, I was thinking that this took place in the 1800s because it felt so old-fashioned. Totally forgetting that he spoke about DiMaggio.
Oh yeah, DiMaggio. Yeah. That famous baseball player from 1882.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was part of it that made it feel kind of timeless. It was more about the character's simple life, which, I mean, it did take place in a certain time because of other signifiers, but that one was also, it stood out to me in that regard. Whereas like Rebel Without a Cause, that is like the 50s, right? Like it's James Dean, leather jacket.
But also, if we are going to fold in Murder on the Orient Express into this, that also, I don't know if that would also be a snapshot of whatever year it takes place in, partly because we don't know what year it takes place in, but just because it's a story that's, I don't know, very compelling. Mm-hmm. You know, the same way that The Old Man and the Sea is, in a way, compelling, but not necessarily of an era. And do you think that's just a result of it being a book and not like a visual medium? Because like in a book, you know, the only thing that's there are what the author, you know, chooses to be there, or you know, accidentally chooses to be there. Mm-hmm. If it's like some kind of like era appropriate unintentional racism or something, you know. Yeah. But you know, there's no like, whereas compared to a movie or even the radio broadcast, you know, but I guess mostly the movie in the example I'm going to use, there's like the cars, you know, that are of a particular era. There's the clothing of a particular era. But in a book, they could just say, he had a nice car, he had a new car, he had a nice suit. It's a fancy suit without needing like, I don't know, the shoulder pads of the 80s or the like car tail fins of the 50s. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The particular visual design.
I think that's why certain ones like Old Man and the Sea or even War of the Worlds, that one also felt timeless to me. That's why certain ones can feel timeless. And I think that's why it can so easily be made into a modern movie, War of the Worlds, because we still have the same fears. That sounds silly saying that, but I mean, the same fears about alien invasion. But
like for War of the Worlds, this would fall into the more unintentional inclusions of era appropriate things in my book. But it's very much from when it's from.
Oh yeah.
You know, like the way, just the way they talk, the way the reporters talk.
Oh yeah.
Right, the voice they use for the like
accents,
or like how they describe things. You know, like I haven't listened to news radio in a while, and maybe that's also a thing. But how like when they talk to Orson Welles' character of the scientist, the observatories guy.
Yeah.
Or like, I am talking to Dr. Peterson of the Princeton Institute.
Yeah.
At the observatory outside, you know, in like a very like both the word choice and the sentence structure.
Yeah.
And the delivery of the word choice and sentence structure is very much of a time, and also like this is more of like a technical aspect, but like the sound quality.
Oh yeah.
Like radio sort of being new, but still being the big thing. Maybe it's not new. I don't know about radio.
Yeah, at the point in time, it was new, and that's part of why the reaction to it was the way that it was. Because we talked a bit about this because it was how journalists responded to radio like that. They wanted it to be sensationalized so that people would not trust it.
Yeah, they would like interrupt shows frequently, radio shows frequently, because of the news of trouble brewing. In the other hemisphere. But even then, like that's not really a thing that. But that being a thing that happens also timestamps it to a particular era. You know, like if you're sitting at your radio and you're listening to jazz music and then they interrupt with some big news today, that's gonna be some pretty big news. Yeah. You know, for it to like be on the radio and not like on a phone notification. You know. Yeah. But compared to the novels like Murder on the Orient Express and Old Man and the Sea, those arguably are more timeless, or at least less tied to their time period. Although maybe it's because that both books are sort of isolated. You know, they're both, one of them they're out at sea, one of them they're like on a train in the mountains in some snow. Yeah. So maybe them being cut off. Maybe if we had included like some stories that was more, urban, in a city, there would be more. I don't know, maybe like a noir. Maybe if we read like a noir detective novel, there'd be more signifiers of like, this takes place in a time period where they have fedoras and cigarettes and streetlights. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think about one that I wanted to do, which was Concrete Jungle. Do you know that one? No. It's a black and white movie. I want to call it a film noir. I haven't seen it for years, but yeah.
Oh, but it's a movie though.
Me to it. Yeah.
I thought you were gonna say like a book.
Oh no.
Now to think about it, there are a couple like Double Indemnity, not Strangers on a Train. What is it called? They were two by the same person who. Oh, The Postman Rings Twice. Yeah, Double Indemnity and The Postman Always Rings Twice. I remember writing an essay back in university about how they're the same story. Oh yeah. But it's a noirish detective, not detective, but a crime novel. But actually, yeah. Now that I think about it, there are some novels that do timestamp where they are in time. Like I'm remembering, this is a weird example, but there's a book called The Pigman. Yeah. It's like a coming of age teen novel. The Pigman is an old man that these two teens make friends with, and he has a collection of ceramic pigs. Oh, okay. Very good. Very, very. It tugs at the heartstrings. But one of the ways it timestamps itself, perhaps unintentionally, is how they describe their phone numbers. Because it was from a time period where they had one, phones, and two, phone numbers that had letters in them. Oh, that happened? Yeah, no, like that was a thing from like the in the 40s. They were like.
Wait, did phones even exist in the 1800s?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I'm honestly, I don't know.
When did Edison exist?
I want to say 1400.
Alexander Graham Bell, whoever
he invented bells. Anyways,
but no, like. They were like, oh, my number is 5 kilo 7. I don't
like alpha kilo. Like they use that.
Well, there were letters. There were letters in phone numbers. I don't remember them off the top of my head because that was a weird time period I'm not entirely familiar with, but I'm aware that it exists. So yeah, I guess the books not being I guess that could say something else about how like the books that we chose as being included as being timeless or like as being capital C classics were classics not because they're a snapshot of the time period they're in, but because of, I don't know, they're good stories.
Because they're timeless, do you think?
Yeah, I guess. The stories are timeless.
Yeah. Well, I think the ones that weren't timeless were probably the hardest to watch and pull something out of. Which one do you think was the hardest to watch, or like the hardest to?
Well, for me, the hardest to watch was Rebel Without a Cause because, like I said in the episode, to me it seemed like, how long was the movie? Like an hour and a half, 2 hours?
Yeah, maybe 2 hours.
how I don't remember if you remember this, but I described it as a movie that was an hour and a half of preamble and then 20 minutes of movie.
Oh, right. Yeah, the action happened at the end.
But the one that I had the most trouble talking about was Sound of Music, because everyone's already talked about everything about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from the music angle, from the story angle, from the like political war Nazi angle.
Yeah.
And most of the discussion I brought to the table was the comparison to the stage production that I saw,
mm-hmm.
you know, rather than the film itself.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
I also, that one, I found it, maybe because it was so explicitly tied to the time that it was in and in the area that it was in, with World War II happening and occupation happening, I consistently felt like I didn't have enough information to make a useful commentary on it. I had a few things to say, but that stopped me. I felt like I needed to know. It's like when I was talking a while ago about jazz. So listening to jazz, sometimes it feels like you have to have a degree to know, just to listen to it. I was feeling that way with that one. It's like I need to know everything about this time period to have something interesting to say. At the same time, I've been fighting that idea as well as the idea that everything has been said about a story, because I'm also feeling this when I'm seeing these. But I've been fighting those ideas, I think, because of what I've tried to learn with my English degree, which is that, like, with English, you're always given random stories. Like, it's up to the professor, and then you have to pull something out of it and make it relevant and interesting. So with that, I've thought that I can make anything interesting if I try hard enough. And that's something that I still want to do, but it's sometimes it just feels like making up stuff. And I think,
that was in my entire game plan whenever I was writing essays.
Yeah.
Like going back to okay, let me talk about an essay I wrote.
Sure.
The one I mentioned, the one I mentioned about the two noir detective, not really detective, but the two noir novels, Double Indemnity and The Postman Always Rings Twice.
Yeah.
I believe that's what they were both called.
Yeah.
I might be confusing them with some movies, in which case they're not called that.
Yeah.
But they were both novels written by the same guy. They both had a similar trajectory of, in one, it was a traveling salesman visiting a house, meeting the wife, convincing her, or them convincing each other to kill the husband and then run away together. To live it up, off the, and I think Double Indemnity, if that is the one I'm thinking of, involved there being a particular insurance clause out on the husband that if he dies on a train, it pays out double.
Oh, specific.
So the main character has to, murder him on a train or whatever. And then The Postman Always Rings Twice. It's a traveling salesman. No, I think the train one was an insurance salesman. So he'd go like door to door or something, or something. I don't know. I might be mixing these up. But the other one, he was like a drifter who like stayed at this motel that was run by this couple, and then again him and the wife convinced each other to murder the husband and then run away.
That is a tough sale.
And in one could chalk this up as an author reusing the same story beats. And
it was the same author, right?
Yeah, same author.
Oh, yeah.
I think the books were published like maybe 3-4 years apart, maybe 5 years apart, but by the same author and the same broad strokes, like I said, of what I said.
Yeah.
But in one of them, I think it's the one where he's a drifter, it ends with, while they're driving away, they get into a car accident.
Yeah.
A vehicular collision.
Yeah.
And the love interest just dies.
Oh.
And the guy is caught because there's cops everywhere now. So he gets caught, and as he's being marched to the electric chair, he thinks, okay, this didn't work out. but maybe somewhere in some other life, me and her are together and our plan worked.
You're talking about another universe?
And don't skip ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I have no idea.
So I just jumped in onto that wording and how, and my essay was about how, rather than it being, lazy recycling of the same plot, maybe they are the same characters in some kind of weird Groundhog Day reincarnation loop.
Yeah.
Of like love and crime and murder and death. Until in some kind of weird purgatory style, like reliving the same basic beats of their lives until they can break free from their sins or whatever.
Just like in Groundhog Day.
Yeah, just like in Groundhog Day. And that is absurd.
Yeah.
I think in my concluding paragraph, I say, this is nonsense and insane, but it sort of works.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, to your point of like
English degrees,
English,
or, English writing.
English writing of it, I forget how you worded it, but like making stuff up or it being being nonsense. Yeah, that was exactly my playbook.
For every essay?
For whatever I could apply it to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's a fun exercise.
Yeah, I agree. It's fun. That's I have a lot of feelings about studying English, and a lot of people I met would say that it's just making stuff up. I heard a lot, English is just bullshitting. That's what I think. A lot of people would say that about the degree that I did for 4 years, the studying I did for 4 years. And I always wanted to fight against that, I think, because I want it to mean something. But I agree that that's also true. It's only as interesting as you make it. And if you can find a way to make something interesting, that's what studying this kind of stuff does. And if you need an essay with a certain amount of words talking about something, you're just making it interesting to you, and by doing that, you're probably adding something new to the conversation. Doing this reminded me of my time studying English and studying stories, and I think in doing so, it wasn't the most practical.
I'm sorry, do you mean like the classics in particular, or just like as a whole?
Any stories, and like classics, because these are what are often studied. Not these 5 stories in particular, but classics are often looked at. And for me, it comes down to it's interesting because I find it interesting, and maybe it is just making stuff up, but that's. I'm losing this.
Well, like, to be fair, stories are also just making stuff up.
Yeah.
Unless it's like a documentary or like a memoir or like a biography or something like that.
Yeah.
All the things on our list that we've looked at in the classics segment have all been fictions.
Yeah.
So they've all been made up.
Yeah.
Some of them are perhaps based on real life, like Citizen Kane is based on some a
real person, right?
Assortment of like industrialists and wealthy people, all smushed together. But and I guess Rebel Without a Cause is like addressing a particular concern. But as stories, as narratives, they're all fabricated out of the mind of someone making stuff up. Mm-hmm. So like, yeah, that is what English majors are doing. But that's also what, like, if you could anything other than like tactile assembly of like construction work of putting a table together could be described as like making stuff up, like
that's
like math, I'm adding
that's
like
a hot take.
2 + 2. What are you adding 2 of 2, and what's the other 2 you're adding it to? Like it's just like concepts. I say as someone who doesn't do math. Like there's literally a category of imaginary numbers, if I recall correctly.
You're talking about like A and B and
sure
integers.
I'm crawling out onto a thin branch here.
Yeah, me too. Let's not.
Like
we're on this together.
Like numbers, arguably, don't exist in nature.
Okay, so like it's math and English, and these are just important to us with human brains. Like it's our interpretation of things.
Yeah, or like marketing, maybe also. You're like making stuff up to like get people to do things.
Oh yeah.
to simplify it, like, arguably anything other than like assembling something with like, like building a car, constructing a house, tactile stuff like that. Arguably everything else is making something up.
So then is that question just too broad? Like the question, like, is English just bullshitting? Is that too broad? Is that what you mean?
Well, like, it is, but so is most everything else.
Okay. That's fun.
Like, this leaf is green. Yes, so are most leaves. Like, I don't know what point I'm arguing.
Yeah, I forget now. It's been a while since. Since a point.
I don't know what my end goal for this is. for this argument that everything is fake, everything's a lie.
It all exists in our brains.
It's like Assassin's Creed said. Do we want to talk more about War of the Worlds? That seems to be like War of the Worlds and The Old Man in the Sea sort of individually stand out as the only ones that aren't in movies.
Oh yeah.
But do we want to talk more about, because like we've talked about the movie ones a lot.
Yeah, go for it. Whatever you want to talk about.
Like War of the Worlds was very much a snapshot of a time and a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And a notorious radio phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Of people maybe being tricked by this to some degree or another.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about, listeners at home? I don't know if the mic is picking this up, but Joel's dog is snoring right behind me.
I don't think it is picking it up. Oh, did you hear it? I can move him.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, so of the 5 things, 6 if you include Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah.
These sprung to mind to be lumped together under classics.
Yeah.
Most of them were movies, but 2 of them, at least, again, 3 if you're counting Orient Express, are not.
Yeah.
What about it made it, and I guess we sort of established it for the movies, part of what made them classics, other than them being, widely well received, is that they're a snapshot of a particular time.
Yeah.
What about the non-movies made them spring to mind as classics to you?
Oh, well, I think because of the recognition that they received, and for War of the Worlds specifically, the notoriety, it has a legend behind it that America freaked out from this, whereas now we believe that wasn't really true, but it has an interesting legend behind it. And it's, when I was thinking of these books or of these stories, I was thinking of things that were household names, and that's one that sprung to mind. It's also widely regarded as a very good radio play at the time, and it's what gave the creator a lot of attention. His name, what's his name?
Oh, like, what's his name? Orson Welles?
Yeah. So it gave Orson Welles a lot of attention at the time for just being an amazing radio writer, producer, etc. So things that have been popular and game-changing is what came to my mind. And the reason why Murder on the Orient Express could be lumped in with this, in my mind, is because of how popular it's continued to be in modern life, how many adaptations there have been of it. It just seems to be the one story that out of all of Agatha Christie's that keeps getting remade and thought about, watched, listened to. Or
like one of the frequent ones. Like, And Then There Were None also springs to mind.
Totally.
It's one of the Miss Marple ones, arguably.
Well, I mean, for you and me, right, those are 2 that stand out the most. I know for me, those 2 are.
But yeah, no, definitely is one of the, like there's a handful of Sherlock Holmes stories that are always, like, I don't know if they're the best, but they're the ones you think of. Yeah. Like, for me, the Sherlock Holmes story I always think of is the one where are you familiar with this one? I think it's called The Speckled Band.
No.
Where, I remember it just because of how stupid it is. But because there's this lady who died and she was wearing a speckled orange band. Yeah. There's an orange bracelet with like green specks on it. And the bracelet's gone, and then she died, but people don't know how she died. And there's 2 like injection marks on her like neck or something, or on her arm or something.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what happened? And then it turns out it was a snake.
Oh.
It wasn't a bracelet. It was a snake that bit her.
Oh. So how does the bracelet tie in?
It was the bracelet. The bracelet was a snake.
What?
Or like what they thought was a bracelet was a snake.
Oh,
and I'm like,
okay.
what? Again, maybe I'm misremembering this, but
it's a great story.
I just remember like reading this as a kid, and I'm like, what is this nonsense? How could they not tell that this orange bracelet was obviously a snake?
Like an alive snake.
Yeah. Oh, miss, what's wrong with your bracelet? Oh, nothing. It's just a bracelet. Pay no attention.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm dying. How did I die? Oh, maybe the bracelet bit you. Oh yeah, that's maybe. Oh, but it can't have done that. It's a bracelet. But no, yes, Sherlock Holmes is also one of the things that keeps continuously being adapted.
Yeah.
And readapted.
Well, another thing that comes to mind, like a franchise, is James Bond, because there have been so many James Bond movies, but that, in my mind, isn't a classic in the same way that these stories are. Like, I wouldn't point to a James Bond movie or novel and say that's a classic novel.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's like James Bond as a franchise. Like, I wouldn't say it's a classic, but more of like a fixture.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the same way that I always say this, like every generation needs a Pokemon and every generation needs a Power Rangers.
Oh, I've never heard you say that. It's so wise.
I guess it's never come up, but like how I just want both Power Rangers and Pokemon just to keep reinventing themselves every however often they do, because every generation needs their own season of Pokemon.
So you're saying literally every generation
like literally
has a Pokemon?
Yeah, literally.
That specific. Wow. I thought you meant like a Digimon or a Yu-Gi-Oh or something that's like Pokemon, but literally Pokemon.
No, literally Pokemon and Power
Ageless
Rangers.
Ash.
I have vague memories of watching Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
Oh yeah, me too.
But that's not the one I remember the most. The one I remember the most, I think, is Power Rangers Lightspeed.
Oh.
Or whatever, when they're like emergency personnel. Like they're, instead of like T-Rexes and pterodactyls or whatever, their vehicles are like ambulances and like fire engines and stuff like that. Because they're because Lightspeed Rescue. They're the Rescue Rangers.
Right.
Rescue Heroes.
Oh yeah, that was another thing.
But that was the one that I like was at an age to like fully process. So that was my
Power Rangers. Oh yeah. Yeah, I think I had the Mighty Morphing one. I think when I was a kid, the 80s one was still on, and that's what I watched when I was really young.
But also
too violent. I wasn't supposed to watch it, but I did.
But also with Pokemon, like I was old enough to like appreciate the original season and a bit of the like second generation of Pokemon.
Oh,
like
I was
Pokemon Gold and Silver.
That. Yeah, I didn't watch any.
So like those are, I think the second season had like 100 Pokemon. 100 new Pokemon or whatever. So like the 250 of the original 150 and the second 100, those are the Pokemon that exist.
For you?
For me.
Oh,
and
yeah.
everything beyond that is like some kind of weird new pretender to the throne.
That's funny because it's the 151 for me with
151,
Mew and Mewtwo, and I don't know any of the other ones. There's like Treemon and Kokonamon. No, those would be Digimon. Yeah.
I remember being like always being a little bit annoyed about that as a kid, of like when a parent, an adult, would be making fun of Pokemon.
Yeah.
They'd end all their names with Mon, and I'm like, no, those are Digimon.
Yeah, I honestly made that mistake. It's just been a long time.
But how? Yeah, every generation. I'm gonna say this another time. Needs their own Pokemon and their own Power Rangers.
Yeah. We're getting pretty far away from Capital Classics.
No, I would say that they're classics.
You're saying Pokemon and Power Rangers are classics?
Well, it depends on your definition of classics.
Now I'm angry.
With the classic suite shows,
yeah,
we went with a particular definition of classic.
Yeah.
Right. The capital C classic, I suppose, is our definition of classic.
We've just been making up that definition, like even up until now.
But I think like when I use it, like when we use it, I'd venture to say is we mean like things that are generally agreed to be capital C classics. Like the big, canonical in terms of, I don't know, society, Western culture, whatever.
Yeah.
Western literature and film significance, whatever.
Sure.
But in the context of like classic cartoons, children's shows, Pokemon is definitely there. Power Rangers is definitely there. Not technically a cartoon, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Or like classic 90s cartoons, early 2000s cartoons, I would list, Recess, Weekenders, Fillmore.
DuckTales? That might have been 90s.
I think
80s?
I think that was a bit earlier than that.
Oh.
I think that was in the same category as, or yeah, if we want to say like classic 80s cartoons, there's I don't know when G.I. Joe was around.
That's got to be the 80s. That's before my time.
But, DuckTales, Chip and Dale, Rescue Rangers,
yeah.
Captain Planet.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So we, with our category of classics, we have definitely put the goalposts in a particular spot. But if we had like broadened it or put it somewhere else, then we'd be talking about different things. I'm trying to figure out a question about this to pitch to you, but
well, that's an interesting thought, period.
Thank you. I try to have those.
Yeah, you're full of them, Vincent. I like that. So I've gone through this whole process with one thought of classics in my mind, but really you've proven that we just made up. Like when you say capital C classics, though, I knew just what you meant. Like the classic stories, that could be movies, books, that people still remember and that stand out and that won prizes and that we study in high school and all that.
Yeah, and I think the terminology that we've been using, capital C classics, was cribbed from something I said. Is that correct?
Yeah, I thought that was just your terminology.
And I cribbed that from a John Green novel where one of the characters refers to a book as a capital G, great book.
Oh, yeah.
As reference to like, you know what I mean when I say capital G, great book. It's one of those like big tentpole books that you'd study in an English class.
Oh, see, well, I think I'm thinking of classics when you say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, I think the terminology is similar. A capital G, great book. Mm-hmm. It implies a similar thing as a capital C, classic, whatever.
Yeah.
As we've been using. But I've discovered a question I could ask out of my ramblings, and say, and that question is as follows.
We're really letting them see behind the curtain here, are we?
So the classics we listed in our capital C classics category, and the classics I just listed in our like classic 90s cartoons, classic 80s cartoons, whatever.
Yeah.
What about them makes them classics, do you think?
Well, isn't that what you asked before too?
Possibly. But I mean like the ones that we decided to include.
Yeah.
Or like we as a society. That we as a society have decided to include under capital C classics. All have something in common or several things in common.
Yeah.
Right. And the ones that we agree are classic 90s cartoons all have something in common.
Oh yeah.
Is there a commonality between those categories?
Okay, like any classic.
Yeah, other than them being good, or is that what makes them classics?
Oh yeah, good is another huge broad definition, but I would think so. I think it's some sort of X factor that makes them stand out. Different shows might be considered classics by different people from different age groups. Like people 5 years younger than me might have their own classics. But for me, for when I was a kid, like late 90s, that would be like The Weekenders, which I don't know if anyone knows that now, if it has any significance now. That Recess, for sure, that one stands out even more than many others. Pokemon, more like the early 90s. But let's say Recess for the point of argument. That one really stood out to me as a classic, and I think it's because it was really unique. It was a show that for whatever reason, I enjoyed watching it more than other shows when I was a kid. But it stands out now because it still had writing that I find funny now. But actually, also The Simpsons. And maybe this is why people consider the old Simpsons so much better. I'm speaking in broad strokes here. They find the old Simpsons so much better than the new stuff. Because it was funny then on one level, and it's still funny now on another level.
Well, it's a similar thing has been said about, long-running shows like Saturday Night Live, and how that, like, it used to be better back in the old days.
Yeah.
And everyone's old days is different because it's whatever. The old days is always whatever it was when they've discovered it.
Yeah.
And maybe
absolutely.
like a year or two or maybe 3 afterwards.
Yeah.
And then it starts diverging, like everyone else's opinion of it.
Yeah.
So is it maybe just like tied to a particular time of your life? Like you were at the age when it matched up. And then when you aged out of that, even though that show is still the same, you started going down a different path?
It could be. And with classics that mostly everyone considers classics, maybe it's because it touches the most amount of people in that way. It stands out as a great movie, not just to one group who was of the age that it was intended for, but for enough people that it's studied and it continues to be read or watched. But part of what also I feel like is influencing this is professors and tradition.
Like Professor Oak.
Like Professor Oak, definitely. Like grade 12 English teachers who use the same books that have been used since the 90s. I'm thinking like I've known a lot of people who studied 1984, A
Mr.
Brave New
Feeney,
World.
like in Boy Meets World, also a classic.
Boy Meets World?
Yeah.
I never got into that, so I don't really know.
Man, you are missing out.
Yeah?
It is amazing. There's notorious continuity errors, but it was a very, very good show.
Oh yeah, yeah. So, and the stories that are chosen as part of curriculums in schools, that has to do with the professor's knowledge and history, and it also has to do with what the school is allowed to teach. So a lot of that is just the tradition of these stories.
But also like a lot of like public schooling, as I understand it, I could be entirely wrong. I'm not in the industry, but it's to like make sure all children, students, whatever, have the same knowledge base. So they all learn arithmetic, they all learn division, they all learn geography, they all learn the history of the country they're living in. How to play dodgeball, and they also learn the writings of these authors that we have agreed upon. Yeah,
so like we've agreed upon that there's enough in these books to be of interest and to engage kids in that way.
Well, I think some kids would argue against them being engaging, but that they've been they're good and have structured society in a particular way, or of engaged in the discussion of important societal topics in a significant way, like in 1984, for example. You know, most, if not every, school looks at 1984 or some other similar Orwellian dystopian style. You know, Animal Farm, that other one with the caterpillar metamorphosis. Is that a thing?
Alice in Wonderland.
Sure. Also, that horrible dystopian.
Yeah, you're thinking of the Metamorphosis by Kafka, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would also include like The Giver in that list, but apparently that's not as universal as I thought.
You're talking about The Giving Tree?
But also, you know, poetry. Also, you know, so kids know what poems are.
Right, and that's why we read like James Joyce or the three romantic poets, Keats, Shelley, and Byron? I don't know. It's been a while.
But also Shakespeare, you know. If not every real high school, every fictional high school in fiction looks at Romeo and Juliet and decides to do a play about it.
Yeah.
And creating drama about who will play Romeo, who will play Juliet. But every school, especially in the fictional universe, looks at Shakespeare, you know, as a common touchstone in terms of societal importance.
I don't think we really thought about Shakespeare at all, except for the one time when I watched the Romeo plus Juliet, and we talked about that, but that never even came up in our classics discussion, which is funny.
Or even like Lord of the Flies. We could like
I thought of Flowers for Algernon too. There's so many more we could have included, but what we tried to do with these 5 is find ones that stood out, that we've one of us had seen or had heard a lot about, or that otherwise was significant. If we were going to do capital C classics, we could do that as a whole podcast, or we could do like a specific subgroup of that as a whole podcast, like an era. Here's the thought. You've asked me some questions.
Okay.
So I started studying English because I wanted to be a writer partially. Do you think reading these or studying these makes us better writers?
Sure, although there's, you know, like, this is sort of a cop-out, but everything makes you a better writer.
Okay.
I think that's a little too broad, but to be useful. But I think it's still true. In one of my creative writing classes, at the end, you know, as the last day, the final activity before we just decided to like chat was like the prof wanted us to each like suggest, you know, a useful resource as writers to recommend to the other writers.
Yeah.
And one of my classmates suggested, "Oh, just look around. You know, you can get a story from anywhere." And I was like so upset. Like that's your takeaway. That's so, like, come on. And my advice was like actual resources, like TV tropes.
Yeah.
You know, like here's a thing you can look at for cliches and tropes.
I think we were in the same class.
Possibly. But I was just so like, that's what you're anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the classics I would argue would be helpful in terms of writing in that they probably helped shape the genre, if not more. Mm-hmm. And they set the defaults. You know, like if you want to write a fantasy story, you got to read some Tolkien. You got to read some more Tolkien. I can't even think of other names that are like as canonical as, or like folk tales, I guess.
Maybe even Harry Potter nowadays, thinking of fantasy.
Sure, but I'm like, if you wanted to write like epic fantasy, like D&D fantasy.
Oh yeah.
You know, you got to read some Tolkien to learn what the elves do and what the goblins do or whatever.
Or play Baldur's Gate.
Sure, to get a feel for the genre, for the setting, and better inform you if you do want to like branch away from the cliches. Mm-hmm. Like on TV tropes, you know, it lists all the cliches and tropes that appear in TV shows, in movies, in books, in etc. And one of the frequent sayings, if a community-created wiki-style website can have a frequent saying, is that not all tropes are bad. You know, these things are popular for a reason. Sometimes they're overdone and then they become bad, but they're done a lot because they work.
Yeah.
And if you can do it in a clever way, then even better. But you need to know what the obvious way is before, like, and after you know what the obvious way is, it's much easier to do it cleverly.
Yeah. I've said this before on the podcast, and it bears repeating, that the best advice I've ever gotten for writing a Dungeons and Dragons game is write a story that's already been told, because you have to, but write it really well, because it's going to be falling within a trope regardless. It's going to be cliche regardless because of the confines of the game, but just make it fun, make it interesting and unique.
Okay. Up to a point, the advice was do it well. And I'm like, is that really advice? How do I do this? Well, okay.
I guess with a caveat.
But yeah, then you explained it, so I couldn't make my joke.
Right.
But,
yeah. But you still did. Well, that's going to wrap up our discussion about capital C classics. Thank you so much for listening. Vincent, why don't you hit us with that list of ways they can find us?
Well, the best way they could find us is by looking us up on whatever podcast program they're using, whether it's Apple Podcast or something else. And while they're there, giving us a rating. Ideally, the maximum rating.
Hell yeah.
And while you're there, show it to your friends. Subscribe them to us when they're not looking.
That really is the best way to help us out right now. If you like what we're doing and you want to support all the work that we're putting into this.
Secrecy.
Tell your friends in a secret way. Yes.
Perhaps make a secret code.
Hell yeah.
And deliver it to your friend. And when they discover it, they're already subscribed.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah, we're talking invisible ink. It could be some sort of clapping pattern. Whatever you want to do. Some
kind of cipher. Some kind of Morse code.
Sure. Whatever works. But whatever it is, tell us too.
If you want to go the extra mile beyond conceiving of and enacting a secret code for your friends and family, on Patreon, we're AllDoubt. If you really like us and want to do that extra step, toss us some money. It would be really appreciated. You can find us on our website at AllDoubt.com. You can find us on Facebook at AllDoubt. And you can also follow us on Twitter at AllDoubtPod. Tweet us your questions. Tweet us your comments.
Tweet us anything that's appropriate.
And if you've got a question that is more long form, you could send us an email at alldoubtpod@gmail.com. That's alldoubtpod@gmail.com. Send us your questions, your comments, your suggestions.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Have a great week.
Have a great week, everybody.
Bye.